Welcome to episode 25 of Bow and Blade, a podcast brought to you by medievalist.net, your home for all things medieval on the internet. Bow and Blade gives you a seat at the bar as scholars of medieval warfare go beyond the Wikipedia articles to talk about the debates and the questions that we're working on today. I'm Michael Livingston, professor at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina.
And I'm Kelly DeVries, history professor at Loyola University in Maryland. Hey, 2-5, man. 25.
2-5.
Isn't that about your age?
And as every fifth episode, we do a Q&A.
Yeah,
We're here.
We're here. Got some good questions today, too.
We're here. We have some very good questions. What are you drinking while we answer these questions?
These ones are the hard ones for me to drink. I mean, I can't locate it or anything. We're all around the park, so I was thinking of just going with still water. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. If you're in the Middle Ages, you drink still water, you get dysentery. I'm going straight with something really heavy. Maybe a G&T with no tea.
Straight up gin.
Straight up gin.
All right. Shots fired. Shots fired. Yeah. No, I'm gonna be doing some whiskey because we're starting off strong today.
Oh yeah.
Starting off strong. We got some great questions from y'all. Thank you so much for sending stuff in. As usual, I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them. We in fact are doing some of our first ones here are ones that came in for our last recording we didn't get to. Though yeah, we'll see. We'll do what we can.
Yeah.
So let's start.
And I gotta say, Mike, I like these questions because as we've been focusing on one engagement, we can't get to questions about recruitment. We can't get to questions about leadership. Our listeners are quite attentive because they are asking questions along these lines. One or two about single engagements that maybe we didn't clear up, or that they want to contend a little bit with us. But I like these questions that are coming in about technology and leadership and other things that we can't cover when we're looking at specific engagements.
Yeah, big broad stuff. Broad stuff is cool. We don't do it enough.
No,
You're absolutely right. And y'all are putting it out. Though our first question's not
No.
Our first question is very, very specific.
And it's specific
Phil
to
Feller,
you too.
Specific to me. Phil Feller, who I believe asked questions on our last podcast.
Yeah, I think you did too.
Phil's like we gotta high five Phil at some point. Phil Feller asks, could Dr. Livingston, that's me, summarize and respond to the arguments that Michael Wood makes in his article, The Spelling of Brunanburh? In the most recent, apparently just happened, History Extra podcast, Mr. Wood claimed that since its 2017 publication, no one has responded to his arguments, and that acceptance of them rules out a Wirral location for the battle. I know that Dr. Livingston has argued against other aspects of the case for a Humber location, but what does he make of Wood's source-critical arguments? And Phil says, for what it's worth, although source criticism is important, I find it hard to believe that accepting a spelling of Brunanburh, the fort by the spring, would be as important as Wood implies. But I don't have access to the article or competence in Old English philology. Okay, so good question. I'll try to keep this as short as I can. And I'll try to say this in the
nicest way. Most diplomatic way. Podcasting.
Most diplomatic way I can. The idea that no one has responded to his arguments is false. That is not true. In fact, I respond directly to this idea, actually in my book Never Greater Slaughter, pages 197 and 98, which Michael Wood reviewed very helpfully and said that nobody talks about any of his stuff, and I'm like, did you read my book that you're reviewing at the moment? Because I'm not sure.
No, cast this
pages 197 and 98.
We all read books we are to review. You know that every word.
Every word, apparently. I guess I don't know. Look yourself up in the index, maybe. So, So I did talk about this. Here's the nutshell of what he argues. He argues that Brunanburh, the spelling that we have, is incorrect. He argues that the original form wasn't Brunan, but Brunnan, and that this double N spelling is a multilingual combination of an Old Norse word brunner, which means like spring or well, and the Old English word burr, meaning fort. So therefore, you get like fort by the spring. The reason he's doing this is to try and connect up with the location he's already kind of predetermined. Like, I believe that the battle happened here. If I can make the word be this, therefore it can argue for my place. Which, okay, alrighty. The difficulties here with this, and I'm just trying to keep this like quick and painless. One, the argument as he presents it actually can go either way. This is he's like, oh, it's a misspelling of the original this way. Well, your double N can be misspelling the other way. Like, this is actually an argument out of a vacuum. It also ignores the other linguistic evidence we have. So, for instance, the Annals Cumbriae, which is a very, very important early source, an independent source we have, refers to the battle as the Battle of Brune, Brune. That works just fine, works great with what we believe is the regular spelling, Brunan, Burr, Brunanburh. Does not work with this double N business. It doesn't make sense now. And we could do this with all these sort of references. It takes a single manuscript difference of spelling, says that's the correct one, everything else is wrong, and therefore my identification of a site is correct because it can be a fort near a spring. Now, even if we accepted all of that, that actually still doesn't argue against a Wirral location. Like, the burr on the Wirral would be near a spring as well. Like,
yes,
it's sort of this weird, like, therefore tada, I'm right. Well, therefore tada, any burr that's near a water source would be correct, which is probably every burr in Britain. Like, they're all near water sources because you need water in these locations. So it doesn't really actually do anything. This has also been, I know there's an article coming out that actually takes this apart on really deep linguistic grounds. It has not appeared, I don't think, yet. But I know there's one coming out. I don't know who wrote it because when I saw it was anonymous, right? But there is one coming out that really rips this to shreds. So yeah, I mean, it's
well,
and I wasn't the first one to kind of point out these
no,
problems.
the bottom line is
Problems.
that Michael Wood is holding so tightly to the complete spelling of Humber. One of the words that does not mean Humber. It means Umbra. It means the river in the shadows. That's all. And he's dying on that sword of the correct spelling of Humber and the incorrect spelling of Brunanburh matching Humber, when the logic of taking a Viking, an Irish Viking fleet all the way around the top of the British Isles and through the massive islands in the top and around there and coming down on the Humber, because that's where they're going to fight the fight, not on the side that would be just as hop, skip, and a jump across from the the Irish Sea from them.
It begs some
Yes,
questions. It begs some questions. It does beg some questions. I mean, it really, in the end, it all boils down to, and every nasty letter I get about Brunanburh, almost all of them, boil down to it has to be on the Humber because John of Worcester said it
right.
was,
Who's writing how many
and
years?
that is favoring. Yeah, we're favoring a real late source that gets all kinds of stuff
All
wrong.
kinds.
And again, I go through this in the book. I just sort of rip John of Worcester a new one. Like, if you're gonna die on this hill that this schmuck you think got it right and nobody else had this important information, I don't know
Yeah.
what to tell you. Like, you're putting the cart before the horse. And
Let's,
yeah, I don't. Yeah, my response to it, Phil, is I don't think it holds any
no.
water. I don't think it works at all. And again, if you could somehow actually, which given the stuff we have, it's the opposite. But if you could actually, yes, it absolutely has to be a double N, and it really is this Old Norse, Old English smashed together word, which is kind of unusual, like that you would actually do this, but whatever. That's what it is. Is it's this weird mutant thing, and has to be. And so, by God, it's a fort by the spring. I'd be like, oh, okay, what did that do to our argument?
No,
Nothing. Like
no,
nothing. Just all it does. All it does is it's an attempt to take the fact that we have one place, we have one place in England that's name derives from Brunanburh, and it's Brunanburh. We have one place. And so if you're going to be like, I just will not let the battle be over there, you've got to get rid of that. You've got to
no,
get rid of that
exactly
somehow. And
right.
this is how Wood wants to get rid of it. And this is how he does it. But it doesn't actually blow that case up any more than I would say it actually supports his case. It becomes, you have a fort near a well. Cool. So
Yeah.
does every fort. Like,
Oh, and one
I honestly can't think of a fort
a-
that doesn't do
and
that.
one location has produced a whole bunch of archaeological evidence, and the other one has not.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously we don't know what the we don't know what the artifacts are for sure yet.
There's a lot of
Um, but yeah, we do have, yeah, we have a lot of artifacts. Yeah.
and
They're
yeah,
finding more
and there's
all the
they're
time,
military oriented. I think I don't think there's any question.
which is,
The archaeology.
ah,
I,
I'm
I know
always,
you're hedging
I'm
yourself
hesitant,
a
but
bit on that. You know,
I'm hesitant there. But the point is, it's, yeah, I mean, Michael Woods, I think I grew up watching him. I love watching his stuff. It's great stuff. I don't, man, I just don't buy why you want to die on this hill. I don't get
no,
it.
no, and I don't know. I mean,
I really don't.
the
But
common sense of military logistics. Why would I mean, I can understand this alliance that's being built by these northern kings against Athelstan, and Athelstan having to go to their place to where they're going to be meeting. But why would they take such risks to go all the way around and completely outside of any comfort zone for any of the three of them? I mean, Constantine of Scotland's not going to feel comfortable coming down that far south on the eastern coast of Britain anyway, especially when he can come down on the western coast and have the support from the Irish kings, the Irish Viking kings. It just doesn't. On a very commonsensical level, it just doesn't make sense. And we know how armies move. Armies don't move that far, and navies don't move that far if they don't have to. It would have been much more obvious for the Norse, the Irish Norse kings to come across, disembark, and march their army across if they're going to go all the way to Humber, not
yeah,
take the river all around. And one of the main facts
right.
that you've looked at, and I think that you've got very compelling evidence for, is that their ships they run back to the ships. That's a heck of a run from the Humber if you've got them located
So yeah,
on
it's
the
tough.
western shore.
It's tough. So yeah, yeah. So I talk about it. Never Greater Slaughter, pages 197 and
Yeah,
98. But again,
footnote. We
somebody,
footnote our
a
podcast.
linguistics really, yeah. I know that there's a linguistic piece coming out that absolutely goes to town and has a lot to say. Um, speaking of
All right.
Vikings,
Yeah.
Micah Tillotson asks, during the Viking period, there were raids on Spain. Did raids ever come from Spain to, say, northern France or England, or did they mostly stay at home? Also asks as a secondary question if we have recommendations for further reading on the Second Siege of Rhodes. Read Michael's book on Crecy and thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh, thank you, Micah. That's very kind of you. Very nice. So let's do. Do you have a recommendation for a reading on the
Um,
Second Siege of
well,
Rhodes
yes,
first?
because the probably not known to Mike Pennyman when if he wrote this question a while back is that Rutledge has released this collection on the Siege of Rhodes, 1522, in honor of the 500th anniversary. It came out last summer. Hasn't been widely publicized. I did the article on how the military fall, exactly how Suleiman is able to bring the knights to surrender, even though it was a conditional surrender, which he came to regret because they go to Malta.
Yeah.
But the rest of the articles in there are amazing, and I think it's a really great collection. Lots of things that I didn't know. Lots from the islands around, such as the hospitalier locations elsewhere throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, and just every single article I'm in awe of who Simon Phillips, who's the editor of the volume, who he was able to bring together on that. So I would that's the going to be the place to go from now on,
There you
and
go.
on a scholarly level. One volume books still be mine and Bob Smith and other books that have come out in the past. The sieges of Rhodes will continually need more study. I think that even my article, which in the 1522 volume, which I think is quite good as far as the do we give what role do the soldiers that seem to be unlimited that Suleiman puts into the fight? What is the role of the guns we and the anti-gunpowder fortification devices that both armies have improved since 1480, and especially as I think the role of the explosive mine and the gunpowder mine that becomes, I think, very definitive there. Certainly had at Belgrade, 1521, and except for a couple of articles on explosive sieges or explosive mines around this period of time, uh, there hasn't been a lot of study on it. And yet
Yeah.
there's got to be
So,
many, many other works. So that, in short, is where I would go.
in
Yeah,
short,
in short,
yes.
in as
In
short
short,
as I
all
can.
that. Kelly's now read the book
No,
to you. Yeah. So the answer to that question is we recommend this new book that
yeah,
came out last
Simon
summer
Phillips editing.
by Simon
Uh,
Ford,
yeah,
Simon Phillips.
and
Excuse me. Yeah, Simon Phillips. Um,
Rutledge.
so by Rutledge. Okay. So good. That was good. All right. Now, so the other part of Micah's question, the main question he actually asked. Now that we spent all that time, um, during the Viking period, did raids come from Spain to northern France or England, or were they all going the other direction?
I mean, they're going the other direction. I'm looking at that, teaching a course of the Vikings for the first time, freshman students, and we're into
Awesome.
both it and my medieval warfare course are into the Vikings right now. So I've been looking at the raids. We can't call them conquests. They don't really conquer any lands, not that early. The raiding on Spain, first of all, is rather slight. There's so many rivers in France, and they're finding so much in France. It's only some adventurers that go down. Cadiz gets raided. Some of the other spots get raided in Portugal, and then Northern Africa, where they find some wealth down there as well. They don't go otherwise. The when the that group of Vikings go down, they choose to winter on the Rhone River Delta. They need to have some place that they can put their ships. That if by chance an overwhelming force was to be put together and come down onto them, they've got to be able to escape. The Vikings never did anything without some sort of an escape route planned, even if they didn't expect that there would be a force in the field. So rather than wintering anywhere on the Iberian Peninsula. They wintered in Roussillon down on the Rhone Delta, and then the next year took off and went towards the Eastern Mediterranean. So we don't have any raids coming out of Spain that are Viking. Now, what about other raids?
You get them later.
You do.
You get
You
them
get later.
later. Yeah.
And Iberian raids against France, that's an interesting question because we do have Iberian raids going into the Mediterranean and South France that are from Muslims, of course, that are in Iberia, but also once Barcelona is captured, once we get those areas, there's going to be raids. They're very minor, and they're more pirating activities from the on the Mediterranean. Uh, I don't know of too many that are coming out of northern Spain into Atlantic France. That'd be a really interesting question, though. I really just don't know. That's have you heard? Yeah,
I don't know of much until we get to the later
yeah,
stuff, right? You know, in the Castilian, fleets and stuff like that. Then things are happening a lot in the
yeah,
Atlantic,
a lot. But often the
coming that
Castilians in
direction.
those cases are being hired.
But that's yeah,
Yeah.
right. That's all Hundred Years War stuff. That's a later
I
period. Yeah, for the Viking period, I don't know of a lot going the other
I don't
direction.
either. Now we got to remember the Viking period, the only place that's Christian in the entirety of Spain, after 711, and up until really until the Reconquista starts, so they go south. That is that section of northern Spain. Their concerns are mostly landed to the south. They're not thinking about northern raids. They're trying to protect their borders. So I think the military effort, we always have to remember, it's not, raiding is done maybe by pirates, maybe by small groups and so forth. They're different, completely different military activity than putting large armies together and marching against places. But when there is a military threat, and that's what was posed continually on the southern borders of Leon Castile during in the years before the Reconquista starts, that's got to be their concern. So they're not going to say, "Let's do a frivolous raid up against France and see what they might have to, if we can widen our
Yeah.
area there," when so much was determined by the enemy on the south.
Somewhat related to this, Peter, our producer, hey, what's up, Peter? Asks, was there a systemic reason that allowed England to be invaded multiple times in the 11th century? In other words, why did Norman and Scandinavian rulers believe, correctly in most cases, that they could conquer this kingdom? So this is a related question, right? But not focusing coming from Spain, but obviously coming from
Yeah,
elsewhere. People coming in to take England. I mean, frankly goes back to Brunanburh to some degree. Um, why did people think they could
no,
do this?
and
Well,
I
they
once had
could.
a
They could.
they
There's
could, yeah. And no, it could they did. So we're talking Peter's focused on the
yeah.
11th century, which of course has the two big major attacks from the Norwegians on one side, from the Normans on the other. But we could go back. I mean, uh, England is not left alone too much unless there's another major force that is sitting on top of them, like the Romans. But the Romans had Julius Caesar tried twice and failed, and then has Claudius's armies come in and take over. Then we've got Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, pretty much as soon as the Romans abandon Britain, and they do, and that's what it is. It's an abandoning. They don't get beat off, back from from the shores of Britain. They leave, and then within a century, everybody and their brother in Northern Europe has decided that they're going to sail over to England and take a bit of it. Let alone the Viking raids that are numerous even beyond Brunanburh.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I did have fun with this once because I was asked to go to the Spoleto conference, which if everybody, those of you who are new, I think it's not got the image it once did when I was a younger scholar. It was there's an institute of early medieval history in Spoleto, and they used to have a big conference, invite of a couple of Americans and a couple of Brits in, and pay for us all. And a week in Spoleto is worth anything. It's just beautiful. The food, amazing. And the I didn't know what to do. The theme was the sea. And so I toyed with this idea. Why is it that basically after 1066 there's very few invasions per se? I mean, we do get a landing um, by the French a couple of times, and we get, but they're not the invasions we're thinking about. And yet essentially between uh, Julius Caesar, so what, first century BCE, and 1066, everybody in it with a canoe is going out. I'm saying there's a piece of England that can be had. England doesn't seem to have that defensive structure. Unlike Winston Churchill's very famous thing about, we're going to fight on the beaches, going to fight on it seems that England puts up the the peoples in England, even the ones that have been previously come in as conquerors, they don't put up much of a resistance for those coming through. I think the funniest thing is the if you read, and then this is because I was having a lot of fun with this article, but if you read The Seafarer, now, Mike, you would have read The Seafarer because, of course, you're Old English. It's a wonderful poem,
Oh yeah.
but it's a very interesting contrast with this essentially this guy who's sitting on a ship in a crow's nest, probably freezing his willies off, and complaining about the whole thing. I wish I was back home. This is so cold and everything else. While the Vikings are all, oh, let's go build a ship. Let's go roll across to wherever. It's up to Iceland, over to Greenland, up to around to Canada. We don't care. But the sole English naval naval literary work is a bitch about being out in the cold. That's kind of the comparison there. Am I making too much of it?
You're probably making too much of it. The I mean, I don't know. The most of us read the Seafarer. We read the Seafarer as this isn't really about the sea. This is actually about um, you know a metaphor, right? This is love and all. I mean, all kinds of stuff. But your point that during the first millennium, uh, there seems to be nothing stopping hardly anybody from coming in, and then after that, after 1066, we just see this huge drop off. Is Yeah, that's pretty much true, and it is fascinating. I would say, well, they are trying to stop there. We have the Saxon shore forts, right? We have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
of these efforts to
Well,
try and do
those are
something,
Roman.
but
So, I mean,
uh,
if we go after Roman, how many fortresses get built on the sea?
rebuilt and used later. So
We built tens of them.
yeah, but so this idea that uh, this idea that um, that something shifts there. I mean, is absolutely true. Um, what is that? Is it the fact that at this point England doesn't have much to offer, right? The tin is not so much needed from here now, so we don't have the import export kind of reasons for coming into England to steal natural resources. Is that what it is? Is it um, politically it has nothing to offer? What is it that has happened that you can say, look, this has changed, but also it was there and still a reason to come in
Yeah,
1066,
yeah.
right? There's a reason William the Conqueror comes in. He clearly sees a benefit to coming in and taking it. But after he does that, yeah, not very many people are interested in going to the
No, and
trouble.
Nick Rogers, the naval historian, in writing his large history in several volumes about the English Navy, he does dip an oar, if I can use the metaphor, dip an oar into this question a little bit. He's about the only one that I've read who does. Most everybody's interested in English shipping is interested after the 1066, and there seems to be always a concern about Navy and after 1066, but not as much before. And one of the things that Nick points out is that Alfred builds a navy, but it's not around very long. It's only there for a little bit. It doesn't have a lot of great success. You can't keep the Vikings out of London, for example. So and then it's not replaced. I mean, one of the things about navy versus fortifications versus say the Saxon shore forts, where you and I have stood and Bob who's a savage have stood among them going, how would they still exist in this type of this shape? They're in better shape than later castles. I mean, they're just awesome. And of course, the Romans using cement, they're using other things, but a fortress doesn't need a lot of maintenance. A navy needs constant rebuilding, constant maintenance of the ships that are there, and then constant rebuilding. It's a very, very expensive endeavor. And so perhaps the fractured political scene, even as late as Alfred, is is means that there aren't a lot of ships that can be used to protect the coast. That would be an interesting thing, an interesting point to follow. And like I said,
Yeah. Whereas once William the conqueror comes over and takes it and sort of is tying political entity across the English Channel, it is now of necessity to have naval component to the political arm of this kingdom, right? Of these realms, you have to have naval capability because you're moving across water. Um,
And the Norman and
that's
Plantagenet
cool,
kings, they're used to the channel as being a channel between their different possessions. So they have to protect that channel. And I think the mentality is just a little bit different. I do think there's a mentality in England before 1066 that suggests, yeah, the rope, the seas around there are not we're not using those as protections. Where you know,
right?
uh,
And it is this is also the sort of thing that uh, in retrospect, this looks a certain way, right? It is the case that the French, on a couple occasions, are like, yeah, I think we're going to invade. They even start planning for it, and then it kind of doesn't happen, right? Um,
or it does.
so it's unlike or it comes off in a little
Yeah.
piece or something like
I
that,
mean,
where it gets reduced, like the
Dover
Windsor.
is a complete mess up,
Yeah,
attack.
and
Yeah.
so we can sort of, well, they weren't successful, and so therefore England wasn't being invaded. Well, no, that's not
No, no.
quite the same thing. There might have been interest, and it just didn't work out or whatever. Whereas the earlier ones we all remember did. Um, so there's kind of you sort of favor the success, and we do have to be careful about that dictating too much. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question,
Yeah,
man.
it is. I'd also like to see, kind of an extension as to, because I haven't really looked at it in the depth that probably should. But trading fleets always have to be protected. I mean, when the biggest problem after 1066, and especially in the 13th to 14th century, is piracy on the Channel. And there's constant blaming of the Flemings, constant blaming of the Normans for. But I mean, when I say constant blaming, I mean justified blaming of both Normans and the Flemings of pirating the trade ships going back and forth. So if you've got an active trading partnership, you got to protect it, and especially as the world trade increases. There's got to be protection of the wool ships and the back and forth. So that necessitated more vigilance as well. And so there may not have been a comparative, well, there definitely wasn't a comparative trading in pre-1066 terms. So,
Yep. No, I think that's the big center of it all. Very totally different take here. This one, it says here it's anonymous.
uh,
So if you sent this in and didn't mean to be anonymous, I apologize. We apparently lost your name somewhere along the line. But anonymous asks, what do you think of Richard III as a military leader?
the anonymous. I think this is
I'm
the
like,
Richard III Society. I think they have append this together. For those of you who don't know,
I feel like I feel like it's directed at you,
it
Kelly.
is probably. I did lecture at the Richard III Society in America, the American branch, by the way, because we have to have branches of the Richard III Society, which is a society that that are wonderful, wonderful scholars and people, but they certainly want to take a pendulum uh, and make Richard this great benevolent king when he is not. Um, at the very least, he is not. Military leader. So, had I had I been asked this question before, I did do a lecture before the Richard III Society, which necessitated me going back. It was on gunpowder weapons in the Wars of Roses, so it wasn't specific to Richard. And Edward, his brother, has a much more diligent gunpowder artillery wing arm to his military than Richard does. But I did have to revisit Richard, and one of the things that I realized is that, of course, Bosworth isn't the only battle of Richard, and because if we judge him on Bosworth, he is terrible. That is a terrible
Doesn't go well.
melee. Oh, it's a miasma, I will call it. Not just because there are marshes all around that he seems to get his troops trapped between, but there's also just he just doesn't seem to be able to handle that battle. Uh, it doesn't help that Stanley stands on the sideline waiting to see which side he should jump on. You really need to have all your wheels, cogs enmeshed before you go into a battle. Um,
Yeah.
but he did actually fight the Battle of Tewkesbury.
Tewksbury.
So Richard had, I mean, he's terrible at Bosworth. There's just no question. Uh, but then I realized that he had taken a leadership role at Tewkesbury, and Tewkesbury is a major Yorkist victory, and one that is very well handled on the battlefield. So, anonymous, I'm sorry, but I may be putting this back up in the air and saying he's a good leader in one major victory. He's a terrible leader when on the second one will cost him his life. But on the whole, uh, I I'm still thinking that he's probably not a great leader, but I think also there's a big difference between what's happening in Tewkesbury, uh, especially when what's happening in Tewkesbury is happening uh, under the titular leadership of his brother Edward, and then what happens in Bosworth is a me- complete failure.
I think there's a chance he's involved at Battle of Barnet too, and does well there.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that we know that. I think there's that we suspect he might have been in charge of the vanguard there, but I confess I'm pulling that from way back.
and maybe and the my seeming brain spasm on the Wars of the Roses is I may not be the only one there. These the Wars of the Roses are very interesting set battles. It's very much a different form of warfare than the others are fighting on the continent at the same time. It's so we are concerned. I mean, they are guns, but they're not using gunpowder weapons in that way. And Richard doesn't seem to have any um, any ability to do those any better than anybody else or any worse than anybody else. But Bosworth is such a miserable failure, and you have to wonder how his tactics could have failed in a battle that would meant so much at that point, and they do. It's terrible, terribly. He's a terrible general.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also so much of that is a failure of leadership
Mm,
on a kind of charismatic level, right? You know that he's lost. As you said, Stanley staying on the side, man.
that's
That's
huge.
such a
That's huge.
massive blow, and that's not tactical leadership, right? That's charismatic leadership. That's a
Yeah.
whole nother part of what makes a good leader, and he clearly fails out there.
Then he loses one of
Yeah,
his best generals to his own anger, with
yeah.
Hastings,
See, I
you know, being
I think
taken out and beheaded at a certain moment. That's just crazy. So I think you're right.
yeah, yeah, I think he's a terrible military leader.
Yeah,
Kelly's trying to sort of give us sort of like, well,
well, I
maybe
am, because
I
I think
don't.
I think, Tewkesbury is an enormous victory, and you can't, you that leadership that Richard displays there is at a time when Uh, had that gone the other way, there would have been no King Richard III. So maybe fate showed us something differently there. It used to be thought that Richard was terrible because, of course, his physical deformities, the fact that his back had the backbone was misshapen from from his disease, and that was confirmed, of course, when his body was found. The interesting thing is that some of the reenactors, and especially those who participate in the tournaments, Toby Capwell, for example, has shown you that it was not that he had learned not to let that hamper him. I mean, he wore very heavy armor with a back that was deformed. He he rode a horse, which seemingly would have been painful with a back deformed. So it's no longer an idea that his physical deformities uh, um, created problems at Bosworth. It's definitely
He got through.
mental abilities there, or his charismatic
Yeah,
leadership
it's
abilities.
yeah.
Interesting question.
On this, you kind of mentioned, like, well, if Tewksbury goes the other way, then we don't have a Richard III. That sort of counterfactual, always fun. We love doing
We
counterfactuals.
love doing
Obviously,
yeah.
you can't know them, right? That's the point. But they're also fun. And speaking of counterfactuals,
Let's have a couple.
Philip Philip Ford asks, what would have happened if either the Black Prince or Henry V had lived?
Mm. Yeah.
One of these, I think, is a bigger deal than the other. But I want to hear what you have to say,
Yeah,
Kel.
and well, both of them are huge deals. The considered the two worst English kings in the later Middle Ages, Richard II and Henry VI. Both of them are kings prematurely because of the death of their fathers. So I think that I mean, a lot comes out of Richard II's failings, including the line that will produce Henry V. That's if Edward lives, does Richard not produce an heir? Does he? Is there the uprising in 1399 that is all successful? I'm not. I don't know that Edward could have lived all the way to 1399 and prevented that, but it's not 1399. It's not it does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just, oh, Henry IV said, oh, it's 1399. Let's go take the kingship. If Richard had been at all successful, he wouldn't have even thought about that. So had the Black Prince lived there, I think that's very important. But Henry III, his pre or his dying before
Henry V.
Henry V. What did I say? Henry III.
Yeah,
All right,
he's
Henry
the
V.
third.
His dying before Charles VI does. Of course, the whole Treaty of Troy is based on the fact that he thinks he can live longer, and he dies a month before. That is so very important because not only does it mean that Henry VI is just a baby, can't take the role of his father very quickly, but it also means that there is no named heir. The Treaty of Troy does not name Henry's child as king in Charles VI's death. It names Henry V, and he's not around, which then gives the Dauphin, who's been, who's
Disenfranchised, basically.
yeah, I mean, he's completely disenfranchised, he's disinherited, but it also, I mean, he's now got a way in, and of course, a young peasant girl shows up and says, "I think you ought to be crowned," as her second mission is to get him crowned. It's That's huge too. I mean, this is a great question, great counterfactual question.
Yeah, yeah. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it's a great question, and these are two, massive, early deaths. That I mean, the Black Prince was he was of a decent age because his father lived so darn long. Um, but yeah, I mean, if these guys live and continue forward, some major things are different in the world. I I think Henry V's early death is a bigger deal. Yeah, I mean, any of this stuff, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in China, and we have a storm and the plains of Kansas, uh, but really that the 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 ramification of the Black Prince's death isn't immediate. The ramification of Henry V's death is immediate.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no kind of the the sort of quote unquote bad things that happen because the Black Prince died before his father does don't really come to fruition until Edward III dies and Richard turns out to not be so hot. But yeah, Henry V's death, as you pointed out, Kelly, that is an immediate problem, which has immediate repercussions in the immediate continuation of the Hundred Years' War and Joan of Arc and everything that comes of that, and England losing, right?
yeah,
If Henry V
yeah.
lives,
Who's
England
he gonna
wins the
win?
Hundred Years' War.
I wouldn't go as
I mean,
I wouldn't go that far. It probably takes a little bit of time, but Henry's got to die sometime. Uh, but the fact
yeah, but he's
and immediacy in our terms, and I agree with you in using that, is relative. I mean, we're not talking about something that
yeah,
happens immediately. What does happen? I mean, I've reconstructed some of that period in my introduction to the Joan of Arc book. We've got a hugely defeated France after 1415. And the memory of that defeated France is there in in the person of Henry V, who's married Catherine of France, has pushed for this inheriting of of the Dauphin Charles, who will become Charles VII. So while Charles doesn't get crowned for another 6 years after Henry's death, it's still immediate in the fact that suddenly that memory of Agincourt is gone, and suddenly they are thrust into a situation where the role of the Burgundians are going to have to be bigger. The Armagnacs, what I think is very telling in the wake of both the assassination of John the Fearless, 1419, but especially the death of Henry V in 1423, is we've got the two major leaders in the north completely gone. Charles VI, even I mean, he's going to die another year. But who do you have to replace him? Bedford? I mean, Philip the Good is very good. He's very solidly against the Dauphin, especially as it seems the Dauphin personally killed his father. But the fact that he seems to waver so quickly after the death of Joan of Arc, well, even after the capture of Joan of Arc, because he's so mad at the English and losing his guns at Compiègne. The anger and letters back and forth. I mean, he demands the English pay for him; they never do. The lack of men that the English have. There's just not a. I mean, Bedford is not a great leader to replace Henry V, and so the immediacy is there. The other thing is that the Armagnacs get immediate support. 1423, they are on the run. They are sitting on the Loire and are running back to the Loire. This is why Salisbury makes that big attack on the Loire River in 1428, is to take advantage. Because they are getting stronger now. And we hear about this in the literature of Joan of Arc. We hear about individuals like Ponton de Centray and La Hire and the Bass of Orleans, all kind of rising up because they don't remember Agincourt. And I think there's even a statement in one of those that says, this is a generation that doesn't remember Agincourt because that's 1415. It's 14 years later. These young men who are coming in who will fill the ranks of the army that Joan of Arc will also join. They are the next generation. Their fathers have died at
yeah,
Agincourt, but they don't remember it.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's these counterfactual things, man.
Yeah.
It is so interesting to try and think through.
Well,
And again,
here's one that I count I once or I mentioned Nick Morton in at the Crusade conference. I mean, what happens if Frederick Barbarossa lives and actually makes the
yeah,
Holy Land?
or the white ship doesn't go down.
White
Like,
ship
what
doesn't go down.
happens?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
huge,
these things have just so many ramifications.
and they're fun to as a scholarly exercise. They're fun.
I mean, Henry V. If at the Battle of Shrewsbury, his head is a quarter inch or whatever in literally any direction from the position it was in when that arrow hits him in the face. He's dead.
Yeah,
Like, he's dead at
yeah.
that point. What the hell happens now?
Well,
But that's not what happened.
Henry IV got other
Uh,
sons, but
they're not
they're
him.
not the quality of Henry
Uh,
V.
this actually somewhat, at least because of the way I'm going to answer it, relates to another question we were asked
All right.
from Zoe Tsiagakuris, looks like. If you could meet any military figure from the Middle Ages and have the opportunity to ask them questions about their life and what they did, who would it be and why? And then, as a bonus question, which medieval figure do you think would be the most fun to go to a bar and hang out with?
Not Joan of Arc. I think there'd be too much judgment. John would look and say, "What? You're having something alcoholic? Come on."
What are you drinking?
Yeah.
So yeah, well, let's start with the first one there. Like, if you could meet one of these folks, who would it be?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'll let you go on this one first. You just indicated you got an answer.
Oh man, it's Henry V.
It is.
Is Henry V, and part of this is, I mean, I did just finish this book on Agincourt, so he's very much on my mind, admittedly. But I am so captivated with his mentality. Is am I right in what I think is going on in his
Yeah.
head?
Yeah.
And it would not take but 2 minutes to know, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm right, or no, I'm totally wrong. I misread that entirely. And that the ramifications of that, I think, are so massive for how Agincourt happens, for what happens, everything kind of prior to and around that. Man, I would love to talk to Henry the Fifth. No, I don't. Henry V wouldn't talk to me, but he
He'd
wouldn't
have
he
you
wouldn't
he'd
deign
have you
that.
hanged in the local tree for stealing up pigs.
But yeah, to me it'd be Henry V. I mean, I'd love to chat with lots of these people, but yeah, man, it's Henry V for me. Who's it for you?
I mean, this is a really good question because both Henry V, we've talked about Joan of Arc, Henry V, Black Prince. These are all major figures. I'd love to have conversations with all of them. I do think Joan would probably be a little bit judgmental, uh, but and who knows? I mean, the funny thing is that I get accused justifiably of not liking Richard the Lionheart. Yeah, I don't think he's very good, and I think it'd be really fun to have a conversation with Richard and either confirm or deny
Yeah,
my hatred of the Lionhearted. I don't think
yeah,
that I mean, I think ultimately that I probably would be poo-pooing anything he said and going over to the French because they had better rations just because they're French. And the English rations can't have improved over the English cuisine now. They haven't taken India yet, so they don't have quid.
but I'll tell you, there's also, Don Peronino. Well, I mean, wouldn't it be something
Oh,
to sit down and talk with Don
it would.
Peronino
It
and be like,
would. It-
dude, show me the scars.
yeah,
Like, is this
show
really
his
true?
card.
Did this,
Yeah.
did you
But
do
on
this?
top of
Come
all
on
that,
now.
there's got to be some really good Spanish red
Oh
with
yeah,
Dom Perignon.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So that's my probably my answer to the which medieval figure would you want to hang out with at a
yeah,
bar?
that would be it. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
for me, it's probably Don Peronino. It'd either be Don Peronino or I think it actually would be kind of fun to hang out at a bar with somebody. I know you're saying like that's the reason not to go, but somebody like Joan of Arc would have to be like on like a train wreck level would have to be.
Oh yeah,
This is fascinating to hang out at a bar and be like yeah, I see
yeah,
you
yeah.
judging. Like, all right, tell me about this.
So what are your voices?
Um,
What do your voices say to drink here?
yeah, what do you like? Talk
It
to
would
me,
be
girl.
hard
Come on.
not to. It would be hard in our 20th century, 21st century sensibilities not to actually mock
Yeah,
some of the things that she would see as
yeah.
sacred.
But the
I wouldn't last very
Don
long, I'm afraid.
Don Peronino, I think he would
It
be
would be great
fun
as a bar.
at the
There's
bar.
no
I
question.
really do. Like that kind of Bertrand de Guesclin, like those kind of
Oh yeah,
they
Bertrand would
would
be
have to be
fun.
fun.
Jacques de Lalang, I'd like to, have a drink with him. Even I, I'd love to have a drink with Philip the Good, the Burgundians. Philip the Good, John the
Oh,
Fearless
yeah.
would be great to have a drink. Charles the Bold would not be as good. Philip the Bold would be pretty good. Just at that caliber, the conversation would be very interesting because they're smart
Yeah.
men as well as weaker ones, or as smart men as well as military leaders. And there's always Pierre d'Aubusson. The problem is I'd love to have a drink with Suleiman or Macbeth or Saladin. I'm not entirely certain that it would be alcoholic though, just because they all did follow Islam, especially Saladin followed Islam. I'm not
Oh, yeah,
certain
man.
that.
God, to sit down with Saladin. Oh, Gosh, that'd be amazing.
But yeah, it would be
Oh,
amazing to talk with him about, just on the eve of the Battle of Hattin, and to sit in the war
oh,
council and
yes.
Saladin, say, "Oh yeah,
We
let's do this."
Yeah, we were just talking about this in my medieval warfare class this week. We did the Battle of Hattin, and yeah, it was like, man, if you're on that side that Saladin is, and looking at what he's looking at, like, let's pull it up. Here you go. Let's look at the satellite. Look, what are you looking at? What are you gonna do? Oh my God! And they
Yeah,
walk into it.
no,
Ooh.
exactly. So
And the whole time you're thinking, hey, we do have that ice to show them after the battle,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
We do have that
we've
to
got our
mock them.
ice
You holding
cream.
on to that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. You
and
keep
dipping
keep
in
that
water.
ready because we're gonna win. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, I think he probably. I
Man.
mean, Saladin is thinking beyond the battle at Hattin. I think he's thinking about how to emphasize that victory, because it's pure theater,
It's
absolute pure
gotta be.
theater.
It's gotta be.
Yeah.
He's gotta be like was it Michael Jordan? I can't remember if it was Michael Jordan or LeBron James talks about how um he's not thinking on the court about how he's gonna beat the guy in front of him. He's thinking about how he's gonna beat the guy behind the guy that's in front of him because he knows the first one's done. Like,
Yeah, that's
you're toast. You're not my concern. My concern is the next three
yeah,
people. Like,
yeah,
that's what he's thinking about. Like, Saladin at Hati, that's what he's doing. He's up to that. It's
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know, man.
It's,
That is yeah. I'm gonna dunk on you. Like, you're gone.
yeah, yeah.
What am I gonna do afterwards? What am I gonna do after my dunk?
It brings a interesting question, leadership, up and gets back to the counterfactuals. What happens if Frederick Barbarossa
Yeah.
actually lives? Does Philip and Richard listen to him? That you know that would be very interesting, because I think that conflict goes a very different way. The Crusade goes a very different
Yeah.
way. Acre does not take as long to get captured, for one thing, and Frederick has a much more determined attitude about Jerusalem than first of all, Philip and if Philip and Richard give him due because he's the emperor, and they seem to have that characteristic, then he solves um, their problems of communication immediately too. So, you know, it, some of these leaders, we always, you dwell on the bad ones because how is
Yeah.
it that Richard III loses Bosworth, for example? But leadership roles in the Middle Ages, um, I mean, the men and women who stand out for a reason. I mean, Ellen and I have acted,
Yeah.
if you want to go in the towards a ruler, but not necessarily a military leader, although she seems to make some military decisions. Matilda of Tuscany as a military leader,
Yeah, I
and
was gonna say Matilda Tuscany, man.
Joan of Arc,
Uh
in just her
yeah.
confidence and other things like this. The the characterizations that we have through history, I think, are not exaggerated. These are very, very capable men and women,
Yeah.
and so we all would probably learn from any conversation. You know,
If Frederick Barbarossa hadn't tried to cross that river,
hmm Gone swimming. You know,
gone swimming.
yeah.
I think about that every time I think about, I won't say who it was, but one of our colleagues telling me that wet gaps don't matter. Um,
Yeah, right.
and I think about the emperor and his
Yeah,
horse.
unless you're the Holy Roman
Sure.
Emperor at 68, decide to go for a bath.
Oh,
Yeah,
well. Oh,
my
well.
hand.
Sure. Tell me again that rivers don't matter.
Yeah.
Um, speaking of monarchs dying,
Mm.
Pavel Sergeyev asks, considering the social upheaval and often conflict that results from the sudden death of a monarch, why did kings choose to personally lead armies and participate in battle?
Yeah.
As you note in your recent book on Crecy, which is excellent, by the way. Aw, Pavel. The decisive element at Hastings was that Harold and his brothers died, wiping out the political leadership.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Edward III and his heir were both present at the fighting at Crecy, with the brief capture of the Black Prince almost costing Edward the war. True. The capture of John II of Poitiers resulted in France giving up territories to England as well as paying a huge ransom. Yeah, or, well, they were supposed to pay it. They actually didn't in the end. But Henry V getting the arrow at Shrewsbury, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, absolutely. Why take these risks
Mm.
when so much is at stake?
I think that,
It's a
yeah,
great
that's
question, Pavel, and we have an answer.
yeah. I mean, this is, to me, it's the Alexander the Great. conundrum. Does Alexander Alexander dies very, very young. His body simply says, these 20 plus wounds you've given me, yeah, we're done now. We're not going on. And yet Alexander, I mean, persisted even with wounds to go into battle and leading his forces. Is the leadership of a royal s- so much more important than the risk that they're taking? Was Must have been asked uh, by so many kings. I think the fact that Edward III, as soon as he recognized the Black Prince is going to be able to take the role, take the lead, he pulls himself back. He goes back to England, lets the Black Prince kind of handle the campaign, especially after the Black Death has removed
Yeah, I was gonna say Black Death has a lot of that
Black
to
Death has
do
a
with
lot to
that.
do it, and maybe that's the thing. But consequently, as you pointed out, Edward III lives for a very long time and rules for a very long time. He might not have
Right.
done so had he been participating in Poitiers on his own, or had he been at Navarre on his own, etc. And I've I've often
You know,
thought about that.
we're dealing with a time in which leadership has this martial component.
Hmm.
And if leadership has a martial component and you're not participating in the martial experience, your your leadership is diminished. Yeah, there is a there is a sense in many of these instances that you're king, you're the ruler because God sort of put you there, but it's like that puts you on a list. You're the one who's on top of that list because you can do this, and I think that we can't separate that. I mean, for
No, you're right.
for Edward the Third, um, if he's not there, why is the army there,
Yes.
right? If
Yeah.
he's not, that the point is to be there. William the Conqueror, he doesn't send them in without him because the point
No.
is him.
And in fact, he has to
And yeah,
raise
that
his helmet. At that point, he has to raise his helmet and let
yeah,
him know
yeah,
that
that's a
he's
show.
still
Look, I am, yeah,
there. Yeah.
exactly. I am here. I am here. Um, so I mean, Pablo, you're absolutely right. The threat of this is massive. I mean, it is absolutely
Yeah.
massive. And we see that with with Hastings. Harold and his brothers die. Like the reason that the Norman conquest happens as quick as it does, it does last beyond the immediacy of the Battle of Hastings, but relatively speaking, is a
No.
fast process. There's nothing to coalesce political defense
No.
against what's happening,
I, th- I think
and
I think Harold could
because
have
they're all
gotten
dead.
away at the Battle of Hastings, but after his brothers are dead, and they're losing the battle, I don't think he sees I think he thinks,
I don't even think he can get away.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah,
There's
I don't
one
even think
other
he can get away.
aspect to this that we don't think about mostly. We often think that they die, and now we've got a crisis of leadership or an inheritance crisis. It's the capture that is worse. So if you look at the situation with John II, as you brought up after Poitiers, there's no leader. And then all of a sudden, Charles V rises, and we need. And the French people say, "Yeah, go ahead and keep him. We really
Yeah,
like the son a little bit better." But this is what happens in the Ottoman army or with the Ottoman Empire after Bayezid's captured at Adrianople. There's such a question about, well, what do we do? Emperor's still alive. He's in the hands of Tamerlane. Not going to come back out, although I don't think anybody anticipated that he would bang his head open on the bars. I mean, suicide being such a venal sin for a Muslim leader. But even the late Roman Empire, when we get the capture of Aurelian um, by the Persians, the a leader who's captured in the hands of the other of the enemy, that's even a worse situation because the the, the tendency is to wait. Now I know after Manzikert, the Byzantines immediately throw over the emperor who's still in the hands of the Seljuks, to go to another one, which creates huge problems when the emperor comes back. So the answer is not often is because sometimes you can just get rid of a bad ruler that way. But that's a fascinating question.
Yeah,
I think tradition.
you are. Yeah, I was gonna say you're absolutely right in that, when if the leader is captured, you can't move on effectively usually to a new leader because there's always that, the other one's still out there. So what authority does the new one have? It seems inherently, temporary. And that's not a good position of leadership to be in. I'm the temporary CEO, but I'm going to really, change things around. You're the temp guy, like we're waiting for the real thing. So yeah, to have the leader die in some cases can be the preferable option because it allows the new leadership to take over. The problem is when the whole, as it happens at Hastings, that whole leadership class is knocked out. Like
Yeah,
you got
knocked
nothing
out.
now.
Yeah,
That's the real problem. I mean, uh, if Edward III dies at Crecy, it's a problem.
yeah,
But the Black Prince takes over, right? It's. But if Edward III is captured or his son is captured, that's what screws things up royally.
yeah,
And yeah, I think John II um, is kind of the exception that proves the rule there, right? That his capture should have had all these repercussions
yes.
and didn't, is such an exception to
Such
how
an
this should
exception.
work. But also it points to Jean and
Yeah,
his own problems
yeah.
and France's problems and yeah, who even wants him out? I mean, yeah, John.
I think that the amazing thing that doesn't get looked at enough is that this transition after around the middle of the 16th century, when you've got the death of Henry II, you've got in France, you've got the death of Charles V, and then you have the death of Suleiman the Magnificent, all within a very short period of time. And then there's a transition. I mean, Salem and Sot does not lead the Ottoman army afterwards. Uh, Charles V's heirs, and numerous heirs over the next little bit don't lead the armies. Uh, and France, it's gone.
I have a theory on this.
Yeah, except for Henry IV. Henry IV will lead the armies, but he's not king at that point. So, this transition to non-royal leadership in military.
I have a theory on
All right,
this.
let's do this.
I I don't know if I've ever tested this theory out on anybody. All
So
right.
let's put
So
it right on the podcast,
yeah,
and you can get
yeah.
your
So
more
let's do
angry
this. Let's do this public. Let's let this happen. I think that this shift is directly tied to gunpowder. That
Ooh,
when we move
ooh,
to gunpowder being used in a kind of more widespread basis, your life and death on the field becomes more directly recognizably. Now, obviously, there's longbows, there's cross. I know all that. I know. But I think the shift to gunpowder and ranged artillery, cannons, all this, like this takes the rationale that my sort of physical prowess on the field can kind of conquer all, whatever, and that aspect of martial leadership, and makes it like not tenable.
yeah,
Like it's no longer tenable. You can go out, and it just happened. Like, and as soon as that shift happens, we're gonna remove from the danger zone these
yeah,
folks. I mean, it's the same reason you don't, right? We get to the Civil War or whatever, right? You don't have the the general on the front lines. Like, I'll point over there and everybody will see it's the general. Yeah, you're gonna get sniped. That's what's gonna happen because we can do that now.
yeah.
And I think as soon as we start getting those sort of technologies, it makes this social shift. I've never made that in print.
No, and well, Jeffrey Parker
I'm
has said,
cups in.
yeah, Jeffrey Parker said
Uh,
similar, and does
I'm
make
in
that
good company
point.
then. I'm fine.
Yeah, you're all right. I think that's a little bit of hogwash. The reason I say this is not
Hit
just
me.
simply because anything that comes up with the military revolution, I'm going to immediately turn my backside towards. But I think that that would have been more immediate than it was. I mean, the fact that we do have Charles V leading his armies, we do have Well, uh, Fred, Suleiman leading his armies. We do have others well within the time that gunpowder is making that shift. I wonder about that aspect. Henry VI or Henry II is still leading his, France the First still leading theirs in a day when guns could pick off pretty much anybody at that point. It would suggest that, and you may have taken this into consideration, but it would suggest that it's not an immediate, "Oh, here are guns, boom," like the military revolutionists want us to believe is that this, is a huge immediate change when in fact as somebody pointed out, I think it's Jeremy Black points out, a military revolution can't be a revolution if it takes 300 years. Uh, so, why does it take so long before we get generals off the battlefield? The fact that Philip II's father leads the battle and leads all those battles in the Italian wars, even if he's a safer distance from the front than, say, an Alexander the Great or an Edward III, but that his son isn't anywhere near the battle, that he's directing from pretty far away, Philip II, is a consideration that I wonder, it may be gunpowder, may have come into consideration, but the idea that Charles and Philip are so different, the idea that Henry II is so different from his sons,
Yeah.
and really after Henry IV becomes king, he takes himself out of any battlefield assignments too.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so it's also, we always cannot, yeah, leadership is a complicated thing, and how you, crafting yourself as a leader and why people are following you, obviously always going to be individualistic. Some need to sort of show that they're in front, obviously. Um, and you're right. I mean, this is, what I'm saying is not something that happens overnight. I don't think anybody's like, what we should stop doing. Because it doesn't stop, right? I mean, even the Civil War, we've got, um, who was it, General Sedgwick,
yes.
John Sedgwick. Famous last
Oh,
words.
that game.
They couldn't hit an elephant at this dist,
Yeah.
and that's the last thing he got
Yeah.
out, right? Like so, even there where everybody knew better, Sedgwick goes out to the front lines to kind of show what a good leader he is, and boom, he gets offed. There's always going to be that rationale for charismatic reasons or ego reasons or lots of reasons, or even a need just to actually the way I run things is micromanagement from the top, and by God, I'm going to know everything, and I'm
Yeah.
the general or whoever who's going to tell me no, so I go up front. Yeah, there's always going to be those exceptions, but I really do think there's something
To the
uh,
techno yeah.
to technology having a role in this that
The
ultimately kind of pervades psychologically and pushes things, you know away from that kind of front leadership.
yeah.
It also, I later on, right when our communication streams change, there's now no longer, you don't need to immediately be there. In fact, having command and control from further back starts to have a tactical advantage. There's that too, but of course you can't do that with certain modes of warfare.
No.
You can't have, I'll be up there on that hill, but don't worry, we'll all be coordinated. You can't do that. So there's that technological side of it as well. Lots changes this.
Lots of changes, and one other thing, just throw into the mix, one other spanner to throw in the mix if we're talking to our English
Woo.
friends, is the is that there isn't the recognition of general leadership beyond the king. So I've made the point that in 1480, in the first siege of Rhodes, that that Mehmed the Conqueror is on his deathbed. I mean, he's going to die within a year, and unable to go to Rhodes itself at a certain moment in time. The generals there take the decision that they cannot lose any more men. Now, had Mehmed been there and had that direct generalship, had his generals had the confidence that they were as say a modern general would, that they were speaking for the state, would that have made a difference at Rhodes in 1480? I don't know. We don't know. We can't say for certain. The fact that Suleiman loses a lot more men would suggest that the Ottoman emperors would have that Mehmed might have made a different decision, and had stayed there until the conflict was over. So we do have that other aspect too. It's just there's no confidence in a leadership and a general leadership uh, below the king, unless it's a royal son or unless it's something like the Black Prince. There doesn't seem to be a confidence given to generalship in the way that a modern general would be given, in the way that an early modern general might be given.
That's interesting too. Lots of stuff to chew on,
Yeah, good
and Lord
questions.
knows what we have gotten wrong.
Good question. Oh, you know,
Just, just as
well,
we're talking off the top of our
the
head.
spot of Brunanburh clearly, but we'd have to go back to the whole
Oh
show for that.
yeah,
You know,
Michael Wood writes.
yeah. I think I've done
uh,
that gin bottle. They're telling me that
yeah, no, it's
you know
they're pulling at the lights, which means we have to apologize. We did not get to your question. I see the next one up here would have been just to tease you. Craig Keller had asked us a fine question. We're not going to get to it. I'm sorry, Craig, but it is now on the top
of the next list.
of our list for the next
You're
Q&A.
not going to tell us what it was a
Uh,
little bit about, just to make that tease.
no, because then we're going to end up talking
Uh,
about it. So I'm not going to tell you that the next question was going to be about condottieri. Oh no!
oh
Okay.
man, what a big one! And no, we can't answer that before we actually get kicked out in the street and the police come
Yeah,
arrest
yeah,
us
yeah.
for
That's
being out.
that's that's going to take some time.
Yeah.
Um,
What a great question, though.
and
Mercenaries.
is a great,
Mercenaries is the next role. Yeah. I have to
a
do some more
great
mercenary
question.
battles. We got to do Castignaro, get Niccolo Capone on, and who wrote the book with me on Castignaro to talk about Hawkwood. We got some good, good mercenaries coming up.
Yeah.
That was a
So,
tease.
look, we I can't remember what the heck we're doing on our next episode. So, you'll find
Yeah,
out.
we're
It'll
doing
be
a
a
battle.
surprise.
Um,
Yeah, it'll be a surprise for
yeah,
everybody,
that's right.
including us.
We haven't done
Um,
Ashby yet. That's coming up. We have done, and that's got to be
yeah, I think we might have talked about Algebrata, doing
Algebrada.
Algebrata
That's
next.
coming up. There's some good
Urbanic
ones.
Burn. I don't
Yeah,
know.
some Frederick Barbarossa battles. Now
Somebody
everybody his name.
somebody actually wrote me on Twitter and said you have to do Halidon Hill. It was not a
Must
quite like an as. It was like a
must do Halidon
like
Hill.
yeah, like it was like a directive. Like I didn't have a choice.
No, I
He
don't
was
think we
like,
do.
do it. Like wow,
Yeah, I mean, I think that
wow, shots
did it
fired.
right from did he write from Scotland? Barrack?
Yeah,
Did he write from Barrack?
um, from Barrick. So look, they're gonna kick us out of here.
Yeah, they are.
In 5 episodes, we'll be doing another one of these
Yeah,
things.
what fun they are.
So you need to send us questions so we can answer them. Tell us that something we said is just totally wrong. You're offended, and we will either fall on our swords, or we'll try and explain
Mhm.
better. We'll see. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Absolutely.
As ever,
As ever.
a reminder: this podcast is sponsored by medievalist.net. So the best way to support us, other than buying our individual books, of course, is to join their Patreon at patreon.com/medievalist. And that is the absolute best place
Mhm.
to drop us a line if you have a question for our next Q&A. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Till next time.